You know, in every one of our lives, we are going to go through a myriad of changes, circumstances, situations, relationships, jobs, finances, houses, and life itself is filled from top to bottom, from beginning to end, with change and more change. And what we need to understand and realize is that change is a natural part of life. And the ability that you and I have to deal more effectively with change will strengthen, empower, and affirm us as persons, and will allow us to have happier, more fulfilled lives. We do need to understand that there are necessary changes in our lives, aren't there, Iris?
Yes, indeed, change is inevitable, and there are changes necessary for our growth, for our spiritual growth, our physical growth, our mental growth, in every aspect of our lives. It's necessary. And wouldn't it be tragic if we all stayed infants? And it would be tragic if we didn't change in our work, in the work field, and also in our personal relationships, wherever we are. It's mandatory that we change.
It is. It's mandatory and it's magnificent that we
Yes.
change. And of course, in New Thought, we believe that change is really the means by which we learn the lessons that we've come into life to experience and to know more fully. And as I say so often in my talks, if we don't believe in change, then all we need to do is, or don't believe in the reality of change, all we need to do is look in the mirror, because we change day by day. And our bodies remind us that we're changing. And as we mature in our physical bodies, we need to mature in our thinking and our thought process, in our mental attitude, in our emotions, and in our spiritual quest, I think. So in all of the areas of our life, the beginning point always is to just understand and realize that change is going to be with us, and that there's nothing that we can do to avoid it. And that's great.
And we need to welcome change, and even in the way we look. And we see people fixated on how they don't want to look older, and those people are very miserable, and it's rather pathetic because it's inevitable. So they need to understand that and get on with life and enjoy the changes that come about. I understand that on the inner planes of being, people want to be about from 30 to 40 years of age. And that seems to be people's most favorite after they go on, if they've lived that long.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's interesting, that we all have a favorite time of life, but we can't cling to that favorite time. We can just use it as a stepping stone.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting as we talk to plastic surgeons, and of course there's a lot of interest today in staying young and becoming more attractive, but we're all attractive in our own way, and we're all attractive at all points in our life. And I think it's interesting, as we've heard plastic surgeons say, that the really healthy view of physical appearance is to be a healthy, vibrant, whatever age one is.
Yes.
And so it's not to be 50 and look 30, or to be 30 and look 20. It's interesting, isn't it, that when we're young, we want to look older, and when
Yes.
we're older, we want to look younger. But the fact is that if we're going to be healthy and well-balanced people, in most cases, what we need to be is appropriate for our age, and appropriate, and the changes in our lives at any given time are always appropriate, and I think they bring us to where we need to be.
Yes, and again, we can change in a happy way, or we can change in a negative way, and it shows in our faces, and it shows in our bodies too, because we'd be inclined to overeat and to not exercise if we're not balanced, and also we would look stressed, and that shows in our faces. So the people who accept life as being real and earnest, and that's the way it is, and we're going to have change whether we want it or not, and we can either accept it gracefully or we can fight it. And if we fight it, it's going to show in our demeanor. And so also the people who accept life and accept change are a lot more fun to be with, aren't they?
They are. They are more fun to be with. They tend to be healthier. They tend to be more vibrant. They tend to have more energy. And I think that all has to do with the fact that they're willing to see life as it is, and to embrace it, and to really roll with the changes and the waves. And so often those who aren't able to do that will marvel at the people who are able to adapt to and accept change. And I think the important thing for us all to understand is that we can all change our way of looking at change anytime we want to. And I think some people will say, oh, I can't do that, or I can't deal with change, or I'm just someone who can't tolerate change. Well, in fact, we can if we change our way of thinking. And of course, this program and metaphysical New Thought philosophy is all about changing the way that we think and being aware of the fact that we do live in our minds and that our thought process determines the quality of our life, the way we think about life. And certainly, if we can think about life in a wonderful way of expecting and welcoming and embracing change, we're a long way toward positive and good mental health, good emotional health, good spiritual health, and probably good physical health. Even if we have a debilitation or an illness or a disease, we can deal with it much more effectively if we're willing to embrace that change.
That would always be true, inevitably. And also, people who accept change have a wider variety of interests. Have you observed that?
They have a wider variety of interests because their mind is open. Really.
And so it would behoove us to keep a wide variety of interests and to accept that even if we don't want to be involved in new things, if we accept that, yes, this is wonderful and learn a little about it, it changes our outlook on life. Because if we look at all the older people that we admire, the people who have gone on in years, we can see the ones that are most admirable of those are those who do have a lot of different interests, and also who accept every person in their own right, on their own merit, instead of having standards that they want everyone to live up to.
And that inability to change, or that rigidity of life, does show itself in so many ways. It shows itself in the physical way. So often in this program we talk about the mind-body connection or the mind-body-spirit connection. But certainly when we talk about change, and you touched upon that very well a few minutes ago, we do damage our physical bodies through this emotional resistance to change and through the rigidity that we have, don't we?
Yes. I was listening to a tape recently by a well-known speaker, and he was saying that his little daughter had lumps on her face, bumps, and she called them bumps. And then when she accepted that she wasn't going to accept them anymore, they disappeared because she treated to have them disappear, and they did. Isn't that a wonderful thing that the children can have the faith to accomplish things more than adults? And the amount of faith we exhibit, really live, then would make the difference.
And as she changed her way of thinking about the bumps, the bumps changed.
They disappeared.
Yeah.
And so that's a wonderful lesson that we can all get what we want by, and I know you teach visualization so very deeply, by visualizing what we do want and not touching on the negative aspect, but it's just like in that case, I'm sure that child saw her face clear and without the warts or bumps that were there. It's like plantar warts or something like that. And so she saw her face as looking perfect, and it became perfect.
So she was open to change, she was willing to change, and she did change.
And she did change.
And of course, that's a physical manifestation, but that can be true of any aspect of life. And so often, when the change is a painful one, we have deep resistance to it, don't we? I think when a relationship ends, when a loved one is faced with serious illness, or when a loved one passes away, when a cherished time has passed, a home has to be given up, all kinds of things happen that we resist. And whenever we resist, we get into trouble, don't we?
Every time, again, it shows in our faces, and it shows in our demeanor, and it shows in our lives, and it shows in our health patterns too. So if we fight change always, then it's going to show in a negative way in our lives. But if we just accept, well, yes, this is what I want, and also we can always want new and different things. I know that many people resist change totally. On the other hand, many people, and I think you would probably agree that you would be included, welcome change and because they know that it's inevitable and they know that it's good. And something good can be brought of every change, so they welcome change. And that's a way of enjoying life and just getting a lot of energy from life itself. Because those people who know that it's good just live it
Mhm.
and profit from it, and the people around them profit from it.
Mhm. And I think that's an important point, excuse me, to really understand that change is a part of life.
Yes.
As long as we're alive, we're going to be changing. And guess what? We even believe that even after this life, there's change. And so we
Indeed.
continue to change always. And so if we accept that as a normal part and process of the life force
Mhm.
and of the life experience, then we are able to deal with it in a positive and affirmative way. And it doesn't mean that we won't have grief. It doesn't mean that we won't have times of sorrow.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that we won't take pause with changes that
Mhm.
come to into our lives. And so we're not talking at all about just being thrilled, at least immediately, at some negative change in our life,
Mhm.
but to understand that change is a normal part of the life process, and that we're going to have changes, and that when change comes, many times there is nothing that we can do about it. And when we talk to people so often in counseling and in our work, we really impress upon them that point, that maybe this is something that you don't have control over,
Mhm.
that just has to be. So are you willing to let it go? Are you
Mhm.
willing to be a part of this change and to let it take you where you need to be?
Mhm.
And it's very important for us to understand that when we're in the midst of change, we are being moved to a different place, and that place is probably where we need to be. And if it's not where we need to be, that there is an additional change that will take us to the place where we need to be.
Yes, because we can flow with it, and it's called flowing with life. I know I had a friend of mine years ago. Her children had all grown. She had three sons, and had all grown up, and the last had gone away to college. And her friends were all saying, "Aren't you sad that your children have gone away to college? All of them now." And she said, "I always say no. That's what I raised them for." And so I thought that was such a lovely thing, and it held me in good stead when my children grew up, because and that is what we raise our children for. And why would we cry when our children go away to college? Because if they don't go, it means they're not living a fulfilled life.
Mhm. And it comes the time when we have to let them go. And we know
Yeah.
that time's coming, but when it comes, we don't want to embrace it. And so many things in our life are that way. We don't want to embrace them. I think of a lady that we've mentioned before in the program who was the organist in our church for many years. And she decided that she was unable to drive
Mhm.
because of her age. And she just decided that it was time to give up her car. And for many, many older people, that is the beginning of a difficult time, because it's the belief that their mode of transportation, their mobility is being
Mhm.
taken away. And she's told me one day, well, I think I'm going to give up my car. And I thought, well, this is maybe something that's going to create difficulty for her. And then some weeks later, she gave up her car and she said, that was the most wonderful thing that I ever did in my life, that I should have given up my car so much sooner than I did. I don't have the expense. I don't have the overhead. I'm taking the bus, and that's perfectly fine with me. And that same lady said a wonderful thing to me about a nursing home. And of
Mhm.
course, many older people, all of us, for the most part, have a thought that we don't want to be in a nursing home.
Mhm.
And she was getting older, and she said, I think I might like to be in a nursing home. They bring you food and take care of you and do good things. So her embracing and viewing change in a positive and affirmative way was certainly different than many people.
Yes, and so very admirable, because she then wasn't stymied by anything that life handed her.
Mhm. She was open and receptive to all of the circumstances and situations of life, and that's truly the way that we all need to be. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue your study of the concepts and ideas that we're sharing with you today.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through confident living.
At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about the dealing with change in our lives. And I think one of the things that we always point out when we talk about change is the difference between giving up and giving in. And when we talk about accepting change and accepting difficulties and challenges that come into our lives, we're not talking about giving up. we are talking about giving in. And when we give in, it is different than giving up. And there's nothing really wrong with giving in. When we give up, we fold our hands and say, oh, isn't it awful? And we begin the pity party. And we all know about the pity party, and we could do a whole program about that. And so we're not suggesting that at all. We're not suggesting that we give up, but we are suggesting that we give in. And giving in doesn't mean that we accept it as a defeat. It means that we accept this as something that is real in our lives. And as an example, a disease. If we are sick, and we are sick. If we are depressed, we are depressed. If we are lonely, we are lonely. If a relationship has ended, it has ended. And the real key is to accept where we are, to give in to where we are, but resolve not to stay there. Because if we stay there, then we give up. And that's not what we need to do. We need to give in. We need to acknowledge where we are, to say where we are is where we are in this experience called life, and now I'm going to move on and do something else. I'm going to be guided and directed. I'm going to be open and receptive to what's going to come next. And that's an important distinction, isn't it, for people to understand?
Yes, it is. And we have to accept that whatever happens in our lives that's beyond our control is happening for the good. And if we look at it that way, then we can accept change far more readily and productively, because we can be productive with change, or we can hold ourselves back. And as we're productive, then we can see that change, in retrospect, we can see that change was really wonderful. How could I have really resisted it? And so if we just make a habit in our lives of accepting change as it comes, then it becomes a way of life.
It does. And one of the big challenges that we talk about with people a lot is employment. And so many people become so static in their employment. And of course, many people, and certainly a generation ago, it was common for people to find a job and to stay in that job their entire life in some cases. But that's not much the case anymore. And the world has changed, the workforce has changed, and life has changed. And so it's not uncommon to find people who are 10 or 15 or 20 years in a position or a job, and then that job ends. And for so many of us, the sum total of who and what we are is wrapped up in our job. And of course, we could talk a lot about that too. But when a job ends or a relationship is tested and perhaps comes to an end after a long period of time, we really fall into some traps of really pitying ourselves, of trying to analyze why and what's happened. And certainly there's some value to that. But the fact is that jobs end and relationships end, don't they?
Yes, and we fall into the futility of life instead of the eager anticipation. But if we could just eagerly anticipate what's coming next, and we know that whenever there's a change, something new is coming, because nothing ever stays the same. Everything is self-replacing, and so we could eagerly anticipate the new things that are coming instead of dreading. And if we do, it makes a difference. And if we do accept change as being inevitable and productive and lovely, then that's what we'll get.
And change has to be a part, going back to the relationship issue, and certainly we believe in marriage and committed relationships, and we hope and we work with people to have lifelong relationships, and we hope that happens, but sometimes it doesn't. But in relationships, if a relationship is to flourish and to survive a lifetime or a long period of time, then both partners have to be willing to change, don't they?
Yes,
and be willing to accept the change in the other. And so often relationships end or are damaged or go on in futility because there is this rigidity and this unwillingness to change. And we do in our relationships, our personal relationships, need to change. We need to expect our partners to change, and we need to change and adapt to this changing reality.
Yes, I was just remembering that doctors think that it's sad that so many spouses of a very fat, overweight person doesn't want the heavyweight person to change their weight, and they'll offer them ice cream and all sorts of fattening things because they're threatened if the person loses weight. And the same thing would be true in all aspects of life. And we need to watch that and guard against it, don't we? We all do, so that we're not holding back the people we care for because we're afraid if they change, they won't love us anymore. We're afraid if they change, they'll go somewhere else away from us. And so it's a form of self-doubt, isn't it?
It is a form of self-doubt and a form of negative self-esteem or lack of self-esteem. And I think we need to have confidence in ourselves and confidence in our loved ones and confidence in the fact that for sure we and they are changing and are going to change. And just the story that you shared a few moments ago about the lady whose children grew up and left home. The changing role of women, the changing role of men in relationships today is just a reality. And so often we'll see a woman in a marriage, for instance, and perhaps she's working and then she has children. She takes time out from the children. Then she goes back and picks up her career, or picks up her education, and then she moves into a different phase of her life. And so often it's difficult for the husband or the other partner to deal with that. And so as we are changing and as our partners and those in our relationships and our circle of family and friends are changing, we need to be open to their change, to the change that they are embracing, that they need and that they're being guided to. And we need to be willing to change our idea about where they're going and decide whether we want to go with them. And in many cases we can, but we need to decide that it's all right. And again, when we get into the role issue in relationships, that is a difficult thing, especially with work and with the division of responsibilities between family and work. But the reality is that we have to change, those around us are going to change, and we have to change our way of thinking, not only about ourselves, but about others.
Yes, and I'm sure that in your counseling you've come on a lot of people whose significant other, whether it's spouse or not, have left them. And they think that's the end of the world and think this is the worst thing and they have to get counseling because they're so depressed over it. But if we look at people from a long-range viewpoint and see that the happiest people and those who have been productive in their lives and made rapid progress at various times in their lives have been those who have had to face change, and sometimes not through their own choice. And at the time, they might have thought it was the worst thing that ever happened. But it's just wonderful how people can snap to after they've had a forced change in their life. And then later they will see that that was the best thing that ever happened.
And that's exactly what the theme of this program is, and that's necessary change, because the real change that brings us the lessons that we need, that allows us the personal growth, that allows us to become expanded persons, really, in most cases, is thrust upon us. And it's the kind of change that we would never have voluntarily called upon ourselves. But if in the midst of those cataclysmic changes, those unwanted changes, we can make our greatest strides and our most magnificent growth, and our greatest strengths can be forthcoming.
Yes, but your heart just goes out to those people who have been forced into change because of a relationship, and they think the end of the world has come. But give them a year or so, and they'll see that's the best thing that ever happened to them. And if we can always point that out to people in a viable way, then they can face change more easily. And I hope that everyone who listens to us would, at this time, would know that whenever they personally face change, then it's up to them to accept it and go on with their life. And life will hand them a platter of something really good. Then it always happens, doesn't it?
It does. And it's important, too, for people to understand, and for those who are around people who are going through cataclysmic or great changes in their lives, that there's a normal grieving process, and that there's going to be that sadness, and there's going to be that despair. But the key is not to let it last too long, and not to stay in it, not to wallow in it, but to experience it, to go through the natural grieving, the natural sadness, especially in losses and in relationships and death and so forth, and to let that grieving process move into a healing process, and then see that there is light at the other side of the tunnel. And I think it's absolutely right that those who are viewing right now that are in the midst of any part of that stage, even if they're at the beginning of this horrible experience of change, or if they're in the sadness of it, or if they're deep into maybe a depression or concern about it, they need to know that they can come out of it, but they need to come out of it. And if they can't do it by themselves, they need to get some help to do that. And some of us can help those around us to do that.
Yes, we can. And I was just remembering something. There was a lady who asked me to write a letter to a friend of hers who had been driving her automobile. It was a station wagon type of car, and a child had been thrown from the back, and the child had died. It was her child. And so she said, would I just write something that would comfort her? And I didn't know what I could write that would comfort her because that's a large task. And so I asked my older neighbor across the street, who had written some books and was a very wise man, what can I say to this woman? And he said, and one thing he told me to say was, right now you can see no light in the darkness that surrounds you, but know that your faith will be justified. And I've always remembered that when I faced adversity, and perhaps that would help others who are hearing us, that you can't see any light in the darkness that surrounds you now, but just know that your faith is going to be justified. And that's what life is all about, isn't it? Living on faith.
Living on faith, and regardless of what anyone's faith tradition is, that spiritual undergirding, and certainly a part of our program and what we talk about is taking the mind, body, and spirit and bringing it together. And the spiritual aspect is tremendously important in dealing with change. And those who have spiritual foundations, whatever they are able to cope more effectively with change, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And we wonder, those of us who have a very strong faith, how anyone can live in this world and not have faith. And that's part of facing change. We have to have faith that things are going to change. And there's all those cliches and affirmations that people can latch onto, but it's helpful. And if we just remember one or two and say them as affirmations over and over, makes all the difference in the world.
And if we're able to hold on to that reality, and just as your friend said, to be able to be in the midst of the darkness, but know that your faith will justify you and that you'll come out on the other side, then good and wonderful things can happen. And then we're able to really look at the reality of change in our lives, understanding completely that change is going to visit us all. It's going to visit you and it's going to visit me from this day until the end of our life and probably afterwards. And so we invite you to embrace the concepts of necessary change, and we hope that the ideas that we've shared with you today have been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.